But I'm going to talk about Puppet Enterprise. I'm going to walk you through a couple of the features that we've really added in the last 2 releases. So the one we dropped yesterday and then the one we dropped earlier this year in May. And then I'm also going to talk to you a little bit about our support lifecycle, talk you through the sort of direct change workflow. I hope all of you are super excited about Puppet Tasks because I'm going to spend a lot of time there. And then hopefully I'll have time for a demo of some of those features that I don't have slides for, including a demo of Puppet Tasks in Puppet Enterprise. And then some time for Q&A, I hope, because I'm sure there's a lot of things that you're looking for from Puppet Enterprise that you won't see from me today. I'd love to hear what those are. And certainly, if you have anything that you don't feel like you can ask a question now or you think of it later, please email me, ryan@puppet.com, or you can find me on Twitter. We're, as a product management team at Puppet, we're always very interested in hearing what you're doing and what we can do better. Yeah, this is not under NDA. I was lazy with my slides. This is all public roadmap at this point. Sorry about that. There's a couple of different themes here that I'm going to try to draw back on, and you saw these at the keynotes yesterday. We're really trying to help you, regardless of whether it's Puppet Discovery, Puppet Enterprise, or Pipelines, trying to help you understand what you have, trying to ensure that you can control it and enforce change consistently across anything you're doing, now with applications, with pipelines. Keep it secure and compliant, and do that on any kind of modern infrastructure you're trying to deploy to. So I'm going to start with control, with controlling change. It's a little bit selfish for me because this is one of the features I've been working on. You may have seen me in 2015 talk about the first iteration of our orchestrator. And earlier this year, these 2 people up front, Melinda Campbell and Yasmin Rajabi, on our products team, built this direct change workflow. And this is specifically for driving Puppet runs and for driving now Puppet tasks against all the machines in your infrastructure. And I'm going to show you a demo of this later, but I kind of wanted to see a little show of hands. Is anyone using this in 2017.2 or even the API and command line clients earlier in this builds? A few of you? I hope you're not just being shy. Hopefully there's more of you doing that. And if you're not doing it now, Puppet Tasks, I hope, will bring you to that. And one of the things we launched earlier this year, and this is available on our doc site along with more technical material on how to scale out Puppet Enterprise. But one of the things we added was scale out of the orchestration services. If you were running 2015.3 or any of the releases between then and the one we shipped in May, 2017.2, we supported our orchestrator for Puppet runs up to 10,000 nodes. You could go a little higher if you added more memory, but it wasn't designed to scale out. We've been working on that, and in that last release, we scaled it out so that anytime you add a compile master to your Puppet Enterprise deployment, you automatically get scaled out orchestration services, which still, roughly speaking, 10,000 nodes per server. That's kind of based on the generic, here's an Amazon X1 large or something with so many CPUs, so many RAM, so you can go up or down depending on the hardware you're throwing at Puppet Enterprise. And just one other note on that, I think there's still been some confusion about this. The orchestration port is just like the Puppet server. It's inbound from your agent to the Puppet server. So we're not reaching out to your agents and executing Puppet runs or executing tasks. Much like the Puppet server checks in over 8140 to get its catalog, we have a WebSocket open from the agent on 8143. Again, the same Puppet PKI, so the same certificate relationship, the same authorization rules, but it listens for commands like run Puppet, execute this task, and the communication is just opened up on the Puppet server. Okay, so I'm going to pause this and I'm going to come back to it in a few minutes. But I wanted to show you some other features that I think play into an overall workflow that I'll show you in a few moments. And that's specifically package inspection in Puppet Enterprise, and then a more experimental feature that is available in 2017.3, but something you've got to talk to us about to use, and that's our integration with Tenable. But first, Package Inspector, and you saw this a little bit in Eric's demo, you can now discover any package on any of your systems. You can optionally turn that on a per node basis. You can select everything or anything you like using Puppet Enterprise node groups. But I like to turn this on my entire fleet just to start collecting data about what packages do I have, what versions are out there. And I think just like the Puppet Discovery tool, which specializes in answering these kind of questions, you'll be surprised by what you have. right? I think everyone I talked to who's gone through either package inspection or has already downloaded the tech preview of Puppet Discovery has found something surprising about their infrastructure. So Package Inspector now in 2017.3 has a much deeper way to browse that package information. You can go and view it by whether or not it's managed. And if you are managing that package resource already with Puppet, we point you at the specific bit of Puppet code that declares it. So if you're working on a broad team and you see a package show up in there and you want to iterate the version of it, it's pretty easy to go and find where in your code base that is. I think I have a couple slides to pay that off. And in this case, I also want to talk about the actual package providers are based on Puppet's type and provider system for packages. So that means out of the box, you can expect gems, RPMs, debs, right? All the system packages, including MSIs on Windows. And if you download the Chocolatey module from the Forge and install that in Puppet Enterprise, Chocolatey packages get automatically inspected as well. And this will apply to any custom package provider you write that is capable of introspecting the packages. So if you did like Puppet resource package provider equals my custom package format, if you get a result of all your packages, Package Inspector is going to start collecting it. I'm not very good at sliding through as I talk, so there's a slide about the managed UI. You can copy that path and go and browse it. And I think going forward, there's more opportunities to improve this so that you can go and see which node group is that being declared in, start looking at the hire data in addition to this. So this is really, for me, a first step in giving you more context about the packages we discover. So package inspection is pretty great. You get to know all the versions you have, but that in of itself is only super useful if you know which versions of the package you should care about. So one of the other things we want to do across the portfolio of products from Puppet is give you more insights into why you should care about a particular thing. And one idea for that for Package Inspector is aggregating the data from vendors like Tenable who specialize in identifying vulnerabilities on your systems and associating those vulnerabilities with packages. So we have a tech preview of that that's available in this build. Again, email Ryan at Puppet if you want to get started with this. It does require that you're running a modern version of Tenable. It does require that you're running Puppet Enterprise 2017.3. But even if you're just curious to deploy it in a lab, we'd love to talk to you. The idea is, once you plug this in, we contact the Tenable API, and we get back scan data. And then we correlate that scan data with Puppet Enterprise to present detailed views like this. All the different CVEs we identify, different package data, and just try to give you a little more context for why should I care about this node, why should I care about that package. And of course, Puppet Enterprise already has one key piece of context. What is the role of this machine in my infrastructure? Is this a production web infrastructure? Is this a backend dev cluster? Give you a sense of prioritization that tools like Tenable don't necessarily have out of the box. So I think really better together in that case. And of course, Puppet Enterprise is really great at taking action on those systems, upgrading those packages, bringing those systems offline. Any of those kinds of things are really what we're all about. And I'll show you more about Package Inspector in a moment, but I don't have a live demo of Tenable. By the way, is anybody using Tenable in the room, just to get a sense for whether this is a good use of time? Okay, that's about the ratio I've been experiencing as well. So if you're looking to adopt Puppet Enterprise, one of the things that's very dear to me as a director of product management for Puppet Enterprise is getting you onto these versions with all these features I talk about. And I know that actually, I'm going to ask you to raise your hands again. Are any of you running 2017.2, the latest release before yesterday? Oh, wow, okay. I didn't expect that, and that's awesome. Thank you for getting up to that release. One of the struggles I've had is that it is difficult to get to the latest and greatest Puppet Enterprise. And I know we had a struggle moving from Puppet 3 to Puppet 4. That was kind of a once-in-a-lifetime event for Puppet. We were taking a language that Luke wrote back in 2005 and really taking a moment to make it well, I was going to call it a professional language, but Luke's professional. So let's say learn from the lessons that he learned over the years. And in doing that, we were shipping every 3 months, keeping improving Puppet Enterprise, learning a lot of lessons, scaling up our business. We went from, I joined Puppet at 60 people in 2011, and we're now over 560 people. So when you look at that kind of growth and those kinds of new ideas, there's obviously a lot of things that we're adding to every release to make your lives better. And one of the things that we did earlier in this year to find a balance between rapid change and leaving you on older and older versions is to move from 3-month releases to 6-month releases. So a biannual release. So you saw a release in May, a release yesterday, you're going to see another one in April. And in doing that, one of the other things we wanted to do is give you a little more overlap to move from each release. Previously, you essentially had 0 day. We put out a new release, you got to get onto it because the support life cycle is in the days, not in the weeks. So we wanted to change that. So now with every release of Puppet Enterprise, you can find support for at least 3 months in addition to the 6 months of that release's lifetime. So what that means is starting yesterday, you have 3 months to go from 2017.2 to 2017.3, where you can call support and we'll help you. You can get patches if we find any bugs, if there are any security events from Puppet or our upstream vendors, like all the Oracle software that's in Puppet Enterprise. We will patch those exactly the same way that we always do. Now, if you're worrying about that 3-month window, keep in mind that we love helping you. So if you need more time, you open up a support ticket, we'll help you pass that 3-month window. And we'll probably still patch things if they're critical. It's just as a rule of thumb, we're expanding the window where you can guarantee get support from us and migrate from one release to another. And I bet a lot of you are on 2016.4. That's our long-term support release. That's the first we ever made. We're about to release our next long-term support release in April of next year. That release will have a larger window of support to move from whatever you're on to that support release. We'll give you 6 months to move from that to the other. Now, I had a lot of good conversations at our advisory board earlier this week. I've had a lot of conversations in the hallways about this release cycle. I hope that you feel like this helps you get a little closer to the latest and greatest from Puppet Enterprise so that you can take advantage of things like tasks. But this is, to me, a starting point. Many of you have talked about how you want a year of support for every release that we put out, so that you have a lot of time to evaluate the changes, move through any kind of internal change release boards, and get a deployment in your lab, and eventually migrate into production. We're going to evaluate those kinds of options next year and see what we can do with some of the new features we're adding. By the way, speaking of that, one of the things we don't have in the product today, obviously, is backup and restore tooling. So you're kind of on your own to prevent disasters on Puppet Enterprise, though in 2016.5 we did add our high availability features, which I would say are a lot more akin to disaster recovery. You can run a master of masters, fail over to a replica. All your Puppet agents continue to compile catalogs regardless of what happens, and if you lose that master of master, you can quickly boot up to the other one and get all those APIs back. We want to improve some of that feature set next year, and I also want to make sure that you have tooling in place to back up a deployment of Puppet Enterprise, restore it to another. You may do that for disaster recovery. You may do that to facilitate a migration between versions, and I want to make that possible for you, hopefully within the time for this next long-term support release. And beyond that, I can't guarantee this, so this roadmap is speculative. Is that my bag beeping? I hope not. Otherwise, somebody put something in my bag that I don't know what it is. No, I can't stop thinking about it. Okay, so one of the other things that I think is limiting both your adoption of Puppet Enterprise, new versions of that, and is kind of inhibiting our ability to deliver new features to you is asking you to manage the operating system underneath Puppet. So one of the things that I'm really excited about with Puppet Discovery is that we deliver this as an appliance that's running containers in Kubernetes. And I think it's possible for you, I don't know if it's actually available in this GA or not, but it's theoretically possible that if you're one of those companies that has already got a production-grade Kubernetes deployment and you just want to run containers that we offer you, we already have those for our open source platform. The Discovery product makes that possible, though I actually don't think that's supported in the GA today. It won't be available until the GA. But the idea there is to move up from managing the operating system and Puppet Enterprise and just run the services that let you automate your work. And I want to get there with Puppet Enterprise too. And if you're curious about that, please send me a note, because we're going to be working on this for quite a while now. And if you want sort of an early build, if you want to try to take this for a drive, either in an appliance format or in directly running containers in a scheduler of your choice, let me know and we can get you on that list. Okay. Enough belaboring of that. I'm going to move on to Puppet Tasks. Has anybody already tried out Bolt or Puppet Enterprise Tasks with the build we shipped yesterday? Okay, a few of you, that's great. And if you haven't tried it and you don't have the software accessible, we do have in the experience booth, the Puppet test pilots, there's a bunch of laptops where you can go and use live Bolt, live Puppet Enterprise, not simulation, it's the actual software, and you can go try it out and execute tasks in our systems. But it comes, as you saw yesterday, it comes in a couple of different flavors, so I'll just briefly recap this. One, and as a former product manager for our Forge, I'm really pleased to see that there's already 22 or so modules on the Forge that support tasks. And the idea is you can ship a script that you write in any language with a little bit of metadata that tells Puppet how to interact with it to the Forge, and in doing that, anyone else can take advantage of that automation. You can do that inline with Puppet code if that makes sense. So maybe you've got a module that builds up a piece of software and you've got a task that is going to go and operate that for troubleshooting or ad hoc changes or transitions for application deployments. And all of those tasks work out of the box with Bolt. And Bolt is designed to be completely standalone. You can run it on your workstation, you can connect to systems over SSH and WinRM, and you can get work done very quickly without standing up Puppet Open Source, without standing up Puppet Enterprise. And for all of you in the room who I presume are Puppet Enterprise customers or prospects for Puppet Enterprise, the thing to keep in mind is that that Bolt might be a tool for you to bring others into the fold who aren't yet ready, maybe teams that aren't yet ready to adopt Puppet Enterprise wholesale. Get them doing something in our ecosystem, because they're going to learn a lot about Puppet's language, our tool chain, and all those tasks are going to be completely reusable in Puppet Enterprise. And furthermore, what I'm about to show you is any of the work you've done in tasks, especially to kind of annotate them with the parameters that you expect to pass into the task. We'll load those into the enterprise console. We'll give you governance on who took actions on those tasks, a rich an audit trail history via our activity service. And so all of those things will just be sort of additive to the work that your teams do with Bolt, with our tasks. Okay. So I have a few slides here just to set this up, but I actually think I can do a live demo, so I'm going to skip all of it. And let's see if I can get out and do that. And then I'm going to come back and talk a little bit about the underlying Platform 5. Okay. So this is a sort of a lab deployment I have of Puppet Enterprise 2017.3. And it actually looks like the team back home updated it to a patch release that we haven't yet shipped. So if you're one of those folks that is waiting for our .1's almost here. A couple of the features that you may have missed from earlier this year, one of the ones that I'm especially proud of, corrective change and intentional change. This is Puppet doing the math for you on was a change that we saw, something that the system, or I'm doing a poor job of explaining this, something that you added to the catalog by inserting a new resource, by making classification changes, by adjusting some higher data. Or was this the state the machine was already in and it drifted? Now, we still don't know why it drifted. It's pretty hard to tell. Did a user go in and update a package? Did another piece of software touch that configuration? But we can quickly identify that that was drift, and we call that corrective change. So I have a few of those kind of running here. Let's go see what that is. So I've got a machine that had a corrective change. I can filter on that. I can view its event in Package Inspector, and in this case, not a very great demo resource. It's one of our internal resources, got changed underneath the hood. I can go back out. I can see what intentional changes are being made, and these machines were also receiving some changes. I expect it's also related to PXP agent. I used to have an OpenSSL demo in here that's not working, but the idea is you can go in here, quickly find the machines that have a change, and kind of start your day by just looking for that drift and correcting it. Now, the feature that I really like about this is that anytime you're in the overview, and actually I think a good example of this, well, they're just going to fail again. So I think a really good workflow is going into failed nodes and then starting a Puppet run from those, but I'm going to show that via intentional change because I know that'll work. You can go right from the overview page, any filter you like, and quickly run Puppet on those machines. This is that direct change workflow that you've had in the product since 2015.3, and we added a graphical UI for in this last release, 2017.2. I don't know what's going to happen, so I'm just going to run these nodes in NoOp. And one of the other features of this, aside from the machines that won't connect, come on, Ryan. Let's do a much bigger set of Puppet nodes. Again, in NoOp. One of the other features of this workflow is that we get real-time results from these machines. So if you've used mcollective in the past, we get a little bit of results back for running Puppet via mcollective, but this takes it to the next level. So as we run here, these machines will complete. This page will live refresh with the machines that succeeded. And for each individual node, I'll start filtering by successes as they come in. You'll get resource data here on how many intentional changes, how many corrections, how many NoOps, etc. You can get details for this. If things aren't going the way you like, you can stop this. And just as you would expect, we're not going to interrupt a Puppet run in progress so that we don't misconfigure a node. But if you do see something in this deployment you don't like, you hit this stop button. Any queued Puppet runs will not start, and all of those that are in progress will complete and then stop. So I think that'll finish up. The other thing I quite like, and I've heard some good feedback on, is this part of the UI. When you click on jobs, you see the sort of representation of something that you could also get via the API and build your own custom dashboard around, but it is the live sets of Puppet runs across the entire infrastructure. And you can have this running where your teams can view the deployments together. So they can see a new job will pop up, it'll add a row here, just like this one that's stopping, and I can click into it. Auto refreshes that. I know that auto-refreshing isn't exactly a new technology, but it's in PE now. And this will apply to, as you might see here, Puppet runs and tasks. We're using the same API, the same tool chain to drive any kind of change you want to make, and it's backed by Puppet Enterprise RBAC control, so you can go through and you can see that Katie has been generating tokens, logging in, running Puppet, and executing tasks. The kind of audit trail for this is both at the user level, and then if I go in to a node that actually succeeded, I can see that I requested a Puppet agent run on that machine, and I have a job ID. Right? So we're trying to keep a track of history here, and I think in terms of roadmap, one of the opportunities that I'd like to pursue is get a linkage between code deployments and these execution of jobs. Technically speaking, PuppetDB today has that data. We know when you checked into Code Manager, which Git SHA is associated with the catalog we generated that we enforced with an orchestration job. But we haven't yet brought that up into the enterprise console, but we're very close. Speaking of, I want to show you tasks. So I'm just going to repeat what Eric did yesterday, where I can go and look at any node that matches certain criteria. Let me make this a little bit bigger for you. One of the things I quite like about this, is anybody a user of the Puppet query language already? A couple PQL. I think this means I use it, but I don't necessarily like it. The syntax here is something we continue to evolve on. This is certainly, if anyone has been interacting with PuppetDB over the AST syntax, that was very much designed for machines, not humans. And we think PQL is a much cleaner way to express questions to PuppetDB. And for those of you who are new to it, and I'm just going to go through these sort of common queries. These are just examples of what you can do. You can really ask any sort of question of PuppetDB, including a node's facts, so what operating system is it running, who manufactured its BIOS, which data center is this machine in, all of its managed resources. So am I managing a package at a particular version? How about a service? What state is that file in? All of those kinds of questions can be asked by DB. When I made a change, how did it go? That's reports. So over the last year, have there been changes to any resources? In this case, I'm looking at CentOS and machines that have a particular service managed. So you can combine these questions together and get the results of all of the CentOS machines that are managing an HTTP service. I showed you that you can do report status failed. You can also do time series questions in here. That's probably good enough. Oh, sorry. Actually, the coolest part is being able to do the exact parameter data. So you can look for resources that are being managed at a particular state. And this also applies, by the way, to our package inventory that I don't have a pre-canned query for. Package name, oops, I don't need a quote there. Tomcat. I do need a quote around this. Okay, so I've got one node right now that has a Tomcat resource on it. The difference between this package inventory endpoint and the resources endpoint is that we're talking about discovered resources. So you can imagine that the Puppet Discovery product that we announced yesterday has a similar way to ask questions of any resource on your systems. And as we get a tighter link between Puppet Enterprise and that product, you can start asking questions that combine managed resources with unmanaged resources and really get a sense of what's going on and be able to target the change you want to make to PE very, very specifically. Okay, let's go run a task on these 5 nodes. See if they have Tomcat installed. I think we found that it's purged, and so you get back some resource state there. And one of the other features that I quite like is you can rerun these jobs. This is a stepping stone toward making these things shareable. I've heard from a lot of you that you'd like to be able to design a particular change set, a particular target of your infrastructure, and then give it to other operators in the business. But this is a quick way to do that now, and I can switch this to something that I know will return HTTP status. Okay, so we're going to go run that. And if you haven't noticed, I am doing this live. It took 4 seconds to do this, and this scales really, really high. I don't have 100,000 machines back in Portland, but we know that this thing executes 100,000 machine scale, and we're doing change sets for Puppet runs in the tens of thousands, and the team hasn't yet tested a limit on the concurrent number of tasks executed. But I expect it to be roughly the same, so let's say 20,000, making it up. But the other key bit is that in many scenarios, and I plan to go and verify this and make a blog post to prove it to you, when we initiate tasks, everything completes before we can render our web page, before an SSH connection would be initiated. It is fast. You're basically going to be limited by the processing on the server to do whatever it is that that task was doing. Okay. Speaking of tasks, I'm going to do one more thing for you. I'm going to go back to the Forge. Let's refresh this in case any new tasks were added. Looks like there's 23. There were 22 a few minutes ago. I think we're going to see a very quick proliferation of modules with tasks on the Puppet Forge, and you can quickly search for those. I'm going to browse through some of these. We talked about the Google ones yesterday. I want to go find one from one of our PSEs, Beer Geek here. Let's go look at all of his modules. I think enable NoOp and disable NoOp are what I want to look at. One of the other features of Puppet Tasks and Puppet Enterprise is that you can restrict per task the RBAC controls for who can operate that task. Now today that still applies to every node, but you can believe that the team wants to make that node specific in our next release. So we're going to try to get that done. We're certainly going to work on it and ship it as soon as it's ready so that you can say, not only can I authorize someone to enable NoOp on these machines, but I can specify exactly which node group that permission applies to. Very similar, I think in concept anyway, to what we've done for our classifier. So one of the cool things about the Forge, you can go and view what this task does. You can read its description. You can read the parameters that task expects. And what I want to do here is show you Puppet Code Manager to add these tasks to my code environment. And I've actually closed that window like a dummy. Okay, so how many of you are familiar with R10K's control repository concept? Hope a number of you are. That's great. If you haven't, this is one of the best features of sort of our ecosystem now, being able to specify in a file what modules you want, and then you have a workflow built around R10K for deploying those modules to Puppet code environments. Now, Puppet Enterprise has sort of an evolution of R10K with an API around it that we call Code Manager. And Code Manager tries to do a lot of niceties for you, like distributing Puppet code to any of the compile masters you've connected to it. It'll also do things like generate static Ruby types for all the code that you've deployed so that there's no leakage between Puppet code environments. That's all just seamless. We can compute the different checksums so that we track every code deployment you make. We know the difference between those, and we can revert back for you if you like. So I'm going to show you what that looks like. First, let's go back to the Forge. So that Puppet file has a syntax where you're essentially saying a module from the Forge at a certain version, and that's all you add to your file. So I've already added that locally. That's not what I want to show you. Okay, let me make this a little bit bigger. And at the bottom, I've already have a couple of tasks that I've installed from the Forge, and I want to go and just add Beer Geek's enable NoOp. I'd also like to add disable NoOp. I save that out, flip over to my terminal. And we support a number of version control systems, but if you're starting and you're asking yourself what version control system should I use for Puppet Enterprise and infrastructure as code, I strongly recommend Git. It's quite nice. And in this case, I'm going to add the Puppet file instead of the other change that I haven't staged yet. I can view, oops, I should have done the diff before I added that, so you'll have to trust me that the diff is this. Now, I committed this into my production branch. Normally what you would do is create a non-production branch of your code of your control repository. You'd publish this up, you'd test that out, you'd have somebody evaluate your work, and then you would make a pull request and merge into production. I'm skipping all of that, because why not? And I'm going to push this to my Git server, which happens to be GitHub, and we support any sort of Git endpoint, HTTPS addressable or SSH addressable. And this can be the end step, because you can configure Code Manager to link into that Git server, and anytime you get a push, it does a post-receive hook and can then deploy your Puppet code on your Puppet server. And that's really common in continuous delivery scenarios. And in fact, if you're using Jenkins for any sort of testing of your Puppet code, we have a great plugin for Jenkins that makes it really simple to connect to Code Manager, deploy your Puppet code, and execute changes using the orchestrator. So let's then, what am I going to do? Oh, sorry. I want to do the version of this that's interactive. And so we have these command line clients. And if you haven't noticed, I really strongly encourage you to check out our client tools. This is a set of all of the command line clients that you can run on your workstation with native Mac, Windows, Linux packaging. And that includes the tool for querying PuppetDB, running Puppet, executing tasks, and in this case, deploying Puppet code. So what I'm going to ask Code Manager to do is deploy. The -w flag says do this interactively, wait for a response from Code Manager. You can just sort of fire and forget it if you like. And then I've told it specifically deploy the production environment. And because this service is backed by Git, we're doing a delta of what it finds on the remote Git server with what Puppet Enterprise already knows it's deployed. And so right now it's downloading that, computing that, and then what it's done here is giving me back a couple pieces of information. This deploy signature matches one-to-one the head of the branch that I just pushed. So in other words, your Git repository, we keep the deploy signature for that. And then these are the signatures for our internal deployments, because again, one of the features of Code Manager is you just deploy to your master of masters. If you have 10,000 compile masters, it automatically deploys to all of those. And here's the nice bit, it's an atomic sync. It will stop catalog compilation during this deploy process, actually queues it. So any agent that comes in with a catalog request is just told to wait a little bit. Every compile master gets the new version of code, verifies these deploy signatures, and then agents are allowed to get that catalog so that you don't get this mixed mode where half the agents who are checking in get the old version of code and half get the new one. Okay, so now that that's deployed, I should be able to go back to Puppet Enterprise, go back to the task page, and enable NoOp. So that task is made available, we refresh this list, and you can just come in, select that task. It doesn't have any parameters. I forgot to mention earlier, the feature of that metadata, one of the coolest things about that, if you have an enumerable set of parameters, we make that a dropdown. So in addition to the RBAC controls that are per task today and per server soon, you can restrict the kind of data people can put in here based on the Puppet type system. Okay, so let's just disable NoOp on every node. And by the way, this module is pretty useful for, and I think Brett made this for regulatory scenarios for a bunch of financial institutions where most machines are running in NoOp mode until a maintenance window, then they disable NoOp, run Puppet. And we provide out of the box a module for manipulating Puppet configuration. But Brett made this so that you can use the RBAC controls to say these people can disable and enable NoOp, but they can't go and reconfigure the server setting or anything else that you can manipulate in Puppet.conf, so it's pretty clean. This is all 89 nodes. I'm going to run this, and all of those machines should, again, very quickly respond back for the ones that are online. Let me use this filter here. where NoOp is now false. Right? So this is, again, a script written in any language. I think this is a Bash script, or actually, I think it's Ruby, so it's cross-platform. But again, a task written in any language puts out results. We run those over our task execution framework. OK, so I'm going to go back here. Actually, one more thing I want to show you that I'm getting a little bit off script. But this is a task plan that you would use with Bolt. You saw Eric talk about this yesterday. And again, Bolt's that standalone tool that can interact with SSH and WinRM. Task plans are an experimental feature of Bolt. We're still working on to make sure this syntax, where you're describing the data you pass into your plan, in this case, it's a rolling update of an application cluster. You can pass data into it, like which servers interact with. You can query PuppetDB for that. And what you do here is run tasks by referencing those that you get from the forge or that you write yourself. And this task is going to go and interact and drain, uses the drain action, that's one of those parameters that you can specify, and passes in data like which backend server. And it'll go and drain connections from a load balancer, go and run Puppet to do the application deployment, make sure everything is running successfully with a health check, go back, rerun that task with the add action to add machines back into the load balancer. A proper application deployment done with a combination of ad hoc tasks and Puppet. Now, we thought this was going to be something that, because it's experimental, because it's coming down on the wire, would only be available in Bolt. But our great engineering team built an integration with our orchestrator so that you can download Bolt, run it on your workstation with a task plan, but instead of connecting over SSH and WinRM, you contact the orchestrator API that powers everything else I demoed to you today. So you'll still see that task initiate in the console. You'll be able to track the deployment, get audit controls, get RBAC with task plans using Bolt. I'm going to give you a quick demo of that. This happens to be pre-recorded because I tempted fate enough. But here's the sort of description of, and I'm sorry, the text is something I cannot control, so just trust me in the flow of this. What I'm telling it is run that plan, pass in static data for those nodes. Again, this can be generated dynamically by looking up in Hira, by looking up in PuppetDB. I tell it where my Puppet code is, and then it goes and deploys. And what I just really wanted to show you here is just that flow. Right? So it's going, interacting with these load balancers, training all these connections, and then I think it goes through and verifies that in HA proxy. And this is a demo that we're running in the experience booth. If you go to the DevOps section, you can go and talk to the engineers who are working on this. I just wanted to give you a flavor of what that's like. Okay. One final thing in my presentation, and then I will break for a few minutes of Q&A. So we just talked about Bolt. One of the other things that we've done in Puppet Enterprise recently is make it easy for you to deploy Puppet Enterprise in public cloud. So we've done that with Amazon, both pay-as-you-go and bring your own license options. The pay-as-you-go is metered billing, so you can deploy in Puppet Enterprise, and then you pay per instance hour, and you pay licensing per instance hour as well. Quite flexible if that's something you like. We want to do the same thing for Microsoft Azure and for Google Cloud Platform, but their billing APIs need to kind of up-level a little bit. We're working with those teams. As soon as we can, we'll add an option for pay-as-you-go. But today, you can bring your existing Puppet Enterprise license to those cloud environments. And we're also going to be adding some tooling into the next release that make it a lot easier to quickly connect instances to Puppet Enterprise, manage their life cycle so that they properly get purged and go away when those instances go offline. And then, as I mentioned, backup and restore tooling becomes pretty important in this environment too. I don't have time to talk through the resources, but you saw yesterday Google's made a lot of improvements to the resources for managing their cloud. Similarly, the Microsoft Azure team's got some great stuff there too. And then we also have great content for standing up Docker platforms, standing up Kubernetes, interacting with Helm for packaging in Kubernetes, and doing all of that. We've also got a Puppet development kit that's more of a platform edition, but you should definitely download that, especially for your Windows admins. And one of the things I like, I don't know if you noticed I was using Visual Studio Code, there's a plugin out there for Puppet code that's really quite great. And in a moment, there's a feature here that I think is really powerful for those of you coming from a procedural scripting language to the declarative model-based approach of Puppet. You know that resource syntax where you're saying before, require, subscribe, notify, the relationships? it's often pretty tricky to make sure you have those right as you're learning it. Make sure the connections of the ordering are right. And so what you're going to see here is that there's a feature of this where it'll generate live the resource relationships within the code that you're writing. And this is sort of a first step. I think there's a lot of work to do here. Vinny mentioned yesterday that this isn't working quite well with a bunch of other code that you have in your environment. But at least for those people getting started with your manifests, this is going to be a big feature to kind of reduce the number of times you have to do a complete loop between Puppet and your Git server. OK. The other thing about the Puppet 5 platform, this is not a shift from 3 to 4. All of your Puppet code that is Puppet 4 compliant will continue to work in the Puppet 5 platform, which is in Puppet Enterprise 2017.3. Your agents that are already deployed at Puppet 3 will continue to work with Puppet Enterprise 2017.3. Now, obviously, you won't be able to take advantage of features like tasks until you upgrade your agents, but everything will disconnect, and you can use Puppet to upgrade those agents when you're ready. We also made a lot of improvements for internationalization, which I'll talk about in a moment. And Hira 5 is the biggest feature of the platform in PE. You'll get per environment data hierarchies, and if you've been using Hira for half a decade, now is a time to rethink that hierarchy structure you built. Take advantage of in-module data. Take advantage of per environment hierarchies. And finally, we're very excited to finally have Puppet in more than English. In this case, Japanese localization in the product for both the graphical interface, the installer, the learning VM, a bunch of different modules have their READMEs translated. We're producing output in that language. So we're really excited that for those of you who want to operate in Japanese, you can get a very great experience from Puppet Enterprise. And if you're interested in other languages for your teams, send them our way. We just have to choose which languages to do next. And with that, I have only a few minutes, so maybe a question or two, and then I'll stay around for a little while for anyone I couldn't get to. Please, I'll repeat it.
I was wondering, do you also in your roadmap compliance checking, like OpenSCAP tool or something?
Yes, the question was about compliance checking, like the OpenSCAP tool. One thing I would recommend in the interim is go and have a chat with the Onyx Point team in the experience booth. They do a lot of work in this space. However, the Puppet Discovery product is where I would point you. That product is specializing in gathering resources and telling you information about it. They've done an advisory service that'll be showing up in another build that correlates with Red Hat's advisory service, with Claire for what's running in your containers. And I would expect that those kind of features are going to show up there. And then I'd like to bring those into Puppet Enterprise so you get the management context there as well. But it'll show up in Discovery first. Anyone else? Yes, please. This is for Puppet tasks in particular? Yes. Yeah, that goes over our PXP agent. And in fact, I should note that Puppet Enterprise doesn't yet support operating over SSH and WinRM. But that actually reminds me that one of the things we want to build in a future iteration is the orchestrator be able to connect over SSH, WinRM, and critically any REST API, anything you can speak to over HTTPS so that you can interact with devices that don't run our agent. So today, for those features, I would recommend you use Bolt, which can connect over SSH and WinRM, and also the orchestrator, so the PXP agent. In the future, those will be natively in PE as well. Vidim, did you have a question here?
Yes. We have different Puppet infrastructure for the Windows and the Unix servers.
Yeah.
They have a very different nature, so the set of the Puppet files is different, so we like to keep it together. But when LAN comes to a picture, like one comes to one, like will it be possible to actually restart servers on the Linux platform and then do something on the Windows platform? So communicates to two different Puppet infrastructures.
That's right. Yeah.
It will be possible.
That is the design. In fact, today, that's a very good point. Today in Puppet Enterprise, you can operate tasks over any platform that Puppet Enterprise supports. So your Windows fleet, your Linux fleet, your Unix fleet. Tasks, obviously you need to be able to operate that task on the other end, so you'll need to take that into account when you're writing that task, but we can certainly communicate over those platforms today in PE. I think I'm out of time here, so I'm going to take questions ad hoc out here in the audience, but thank you for your time, and please enjoy the rest of PuppetConf.